It started like any other sunny afternoon in a small American town, the kind of place where flags flutter from every porch, kids ride their bikes through cracked sidewalks, and neighbors still wave when they pass each other on the street. The annual Memorial Day parade had drawn families from all over the county, many of them lining Main Street with folding chairs, iced coolers, and Stars and Stripes t-shirts. You could feel it in the air, the scent of barbecue wafting from nearby homes, the distant thump of a marching band echoing through tree-lined blocks, and a sense of unity that felt almost too rare these days. But no one could have guessed what was about to happen next. A single moment, just a few seconds long, would turn the tide of the day, spark a firestorm on social media, and leave millions across the country talking about a parade they'd never even attended. And it all began with a teenager, a decorated war veteran, and a crowd that refused to stay silent. Now, before we go further, let's pause here. Because if you think this is just another feel-good story or some quick viral video to scroll past, you're wrong. This moment cracked open something deeper, something raw, something powerful that the internet couldn't ignore. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why what happened that day matters. You'll see what really unfolded behind the shaky phone camera footage that swept across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts within hours. You'll learn who that veteran was, what the teen said to him, and why the crowd's response was so unforgettable it's still making headlines. But more importantly, you'll understand how this one interaction became a symbol, a flashpoint, and for some, even a wake-up call. So, stick with me. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a lesson. And it just might change how you see people, especially the quiet ones wearing old uniforms and worn-out boots. Let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed a moment so uncomfortable that it made you freeze? Maybe you didn't know whether to speak up, step in, or just walk away. That gut punch silence. That boiling tension. It's the kind of thing that doesn't just play out in public, it lives in your mind afterward. Plays on repeat. That's exactly what one woman, Jessica, described after filming what she thought would be a heartwarming tribute to veterans during her town's parade. She was recording her young son waving a flag as the procession moved by. Her phone was shaky, filled with ambient noise, the band playing, kids laughing, but then it happened. Her lens caught something else. A teenage boy, around 15, maybe 16, stepped toward an elderly man in uniform and said something under his breath. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. The words hit like a slap. The man's reaction? Stoic. Controlled. But the people around him? Not so much. What followed wasn't rehearsed, and it definitely wasn't expected. It was pure, raw, human instinct. And that's exactly why it went viral. If you've ever been on the receiving end of disrespect, especially after a life of service, you'll feel this one deep. And if you've ever been a bystander, wondering whether you should have done more, this story will hit even harder. Because we all like to think we'd say something, right? That we'd stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. But when the moment actually comes, most people just freeze. That day, the crowd didn't freeze. They acted. And it wasn't rage, violence, or public shaming that followed. It was something much smarter, much more powerful. A masterclass in grace, dignity, and collective respect that left the teen visibly shaken, and the veteran humbled beyond words. Now, let's take a moment to talk directly. You and me. You didn't click on this video by accident. Maybe you've seen the clip floating around YouTube, labeled things like Kid DISRESB CDS War Hero, then crowd claps back, or veteran mocked at parade. What happens next is pure justice. Maybe you're here because you're tired of watching people treat each other like garbage without consequences. Or maybe, just maybe, you're here because you believe respect still matters. That kindness isn't weakness. That there's still such a thing as honor. If that's you, you're in the right place. And I'm going to give you the full story. Not the viral version. The real one. The version no one else is telling. The truth is, this isn't just about a kid being rude. It's about what happens when we forget to teach the value of service. When history becomes something we scroll past. When sacrifice is something we celebrate with cookouts, but don't fully understand. This story reminds us what respect actually looks like in action. Not just in words, but in the choices people make when no one tells them what to do. And when you see what the crowd did, not just one person, but a collective movement that started with a single voice, you'll realize just how powerful a community can be when it decides enough is enough. Let's talk about the key players for a second, without giving away too much. The veteran? His name is Frank Delgado, 76 years old. Retired U.S. Army Sergeant. 2 tours in Vietnam. 1 Purple Heart. And the kind of guy who doesn't like to talk about what he's seen. He comes to the parade every year, wearing his old hat, holding a small American flag in his right hand, his left arm stiff from an old injury he got decades ago. He doesn't want attention. He's not there to be thanked. He just wants to remember. To honor the people who didn't come back. The ones whose names never got chanted, whose stories got buried with them. He's quiet. He's respectful. And he never expected to be at the center of a national conversation. And then there's the teen. His name isn't public, and we'll keep it that way, because this isn't about shaming him. But what he said struck a nerve, not just with Frank, but with every single person who heard it. A mix of sarcasm, ignorance, and attitude, the kind that makes your blood boil if you've ever worn a uniform or known someone who has. But here's the twist. This kid wasn't alone. He was surrounded by friends, some laughing, some unsure, most doing what teens do when one of them steps out of line they watched. But it wasn't his group's reaction that mattered. It was the crowd's. And this is where it gets interesting. Because what happened next wasn't captured in full by the viral clip. That part only showed the beginning. What really changed everything happened in the moments after. And that is the story we're about to tell. A story about honor, redemption, and the unexpected way a town full of strangers reminded one young man what real courage looks like, not with fists, not with threats, but with something stronger. Before we move on, I want to make you a promise. If you stay with me, you're going to walk away with more than just the facts of what happened. You'll understand the psychology behind why this story struck such a chord. You'll see how social media transformed a moment of tension into a national debate. And most importantly, you'll witness the quiet strength of a man who didn't need to speak loudly to leave a lasting impact. So, don't scroll. Don't click away. Because everything that matters, the part that left viewers in tears, the part that made veterans across the country stand up from their chairs in silent respect, is coming up next. But first, let me ask you this. If you had been there that day, just a few feet from where it all went down, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Turned your head? Or would you have stood with the crowd, shoulder to shoulder, and added your voice to something bigger than just a response? It was a statement. One that made waves. One that left a mark. And just when you think the story is about to settle, when you think the confrontation is over and everyone goes home, that's when it takes a turn you won't see coming. A twist so unexpected, so emotionally charged, it brought some in the crowd to tears and left even Frank himself stunned into silence. And trust me, you're going to want to see what that was. Frank Delgado had never liked the spotlight. Even back when he was barely 20 years old and carrying more weight on his shoulders than most men twice his age, he wasn't the kind to brag or talk tough. He just did what needed to be done. No cameras. No hashtags. Just grit, duty, and survival. After the war, he didn't talk much about it. Not with neighbors. Not even with his late wife, Marie. She used to joke that Frank said more to their golden retriever than he did to the news reporters who sometimes reached out around Veterans Day. But that was Frank. A quiet soul who carried a heavy past behind gentle eyes. After Marie passed away 3 years ago, he stopped attending most town events, keeping to his daily routine of long walks before dawn, volunteering once a week at the local food pantry, and tending the overgrown backyard she used to love so much. But something had pulled him out that morning. A sense of duty. Maybe even guilt. Or maybe it was that envelope he received in the mail just days before the parade. No return address, just a single, typed note inside that read, "Your name's not forgotten. Come to the parade." He didn't tell anyone about that letter. Folded it twice and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. But it stayed on his mind. Frank wasn't the type to entertain drama or paranoia, but the message haunted him. Not threatening, not cruel, but intentional, specific. And that word, forgotten, hit him in a way that caught him off guard. Because even though the town always clapped when the veterans walked by, even though the announcer over the loudspeaker always said, "Thank you for your service," Frank knew that time had a way of burying people. Not just in the ground, but in memory. And as more of his old unit passed away, as fewer of them remained to swap stories or sit in silence together, Frank started feeling like maybe he was being forgotten. That maybe all the noise people made on the 4th of July or Veterans Day didn't mean as much as they claimed. That maybe the younger generation didn't care at all. That's what made the teens' comment hurt more than it should have. Frank wasn't shocked by disrespect. He'd seen worse in his lifetime. But something about when it happened and how it happened made it sting deeper. Because the parade wasn't just a ceremony, it was a moment of reflection, a chance to stand for something bigger. And while Frank had dealt with pain in silence before, the comment this teen made, snide, sharp, loud enough for a small circle to laugh, felt like a deliberate slap in the face of every name on the memorial wall just a few feet away. But it wasn't the insult alone that made the moment spiral. It was what came after. The look on the teen's face when he realized people had heard him. The way he tried to shrug it off. And the way the people around Frank, regular citizens, parents, even a few other veterans, suddenly froze, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't heard it. What no one knew at the time was that Frank had already been on edge. The week leading up to the parade had been strange. A few things out of place. A black sedan parked across the street for 2 days that vanished when he finally approached. An anonymous phone call with no one on the other end. And a man in a dark coat who followed him around the grocery store just 3 days before, ducking into an aisle every time Frank turned around. He hadn't told anyone. Didn't want to seem paranoid. But the combination of those odd moments, the strange letter, and the timing of the parade had stirred something in Frank, an old instinct. The kind that doesn't come from paranoia, but from experience. From survival. Something was off, and the teen's comment only confirmed it. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone wanted him to react. To make a scene.
But why?
Some people who saw the viral video assumed the teen was just acting out. Maybe it was immaturity, bad parenting, or social media clout chasing, trying to get a reaction on TikTok or baiting someone into doing something dramatic. But others, especially those who knew Frank personally, started whispering about something deeper. A few veterans in town said the comment felt too pointed. Like the kid knew exactly what would sting. One even said he recognized the teen from a local youth program that had recently shut down after rumors of behavioral issues and shady outside funding. Nothing confirmed, but the whispers started piling up. And then there was Jessica, the woman who had filmed the moment. When the video first blew up online, she thought it would just bring awareness or spark some support for veterans. But what she didn't expect were the messages. Dozens of them. From burner accounts, from strange emails, some just blank. Others asking her why she was getting involved in things she didn't understand. At first, she dismissed them. Internet trolls.
Bots.
But then one of the messages mentioned her son by name. And that's when she stopped sleeping easy. Meanwhile, people started asking questions about the teen. His parents didn't want to speak to the press. The school district released a vague statement about respectful conduct. But a former teacher quietly hinted that the boy had been influenced recently by an older cousin who had returned from overseas. Not military, but someone who'd been living abroad, possibly involved in underground forums, maybe even political activism. Fringe stuff. The kind that draws in lost kids looking for identity. Frank, of course, knew nothing about this at the time. But in the days that followed the parade, he started noticing things that didn't add up. Like how the footage was being edited and reshared by accounts with strange usernames and oddly similar captions. Almost as if someone wanted to steer the narrative. Frame it. Use it. Turn it into something else entirely. And just when things seemed to settle, a new video surfaced. One that hadn't gone public until 4 days after the parade. It was filmed from a different angle. Slightly shaky, from a phone held at waist level. It didn't show Frank or the teen, it showed the crowd. More specifically, a man in a military-style cap standing a few yards back, watching everything unfold but never stepping in. When the confrontation began, the man reached into his coat, not aggressively but deliberately, and whispered something into a small mic attached to his collar. You wouldn't notice it unless you slowed the footage. But someone did. A veteran who'd served in military intelligence recognized the gesture and posted a comment that blew up. That guy's not a spectator. He's surveillance. And that's when the theories really exploded. Some believed the teen was a plant, that the whole thing was orchestrated. Others thought Frank was being targeted for something buried in his past, maybe something classified, maybe something that resurfaced after all these years. The letter, the black sedan, the silent phone calls. They all pointed to a larger mystery no one was ready to name. Frank began to wonder if this wasn't just about respect. If someone had used the parade and the viral power of social media as a distraction, a smokescreen, to watch him, to test him, or maybe to expose something he didn't even know he had. But if you think you've figured it out, trust me, you haven't. Because what happens next doesn't just turn the story upside down. It forces everyone involved, including Frank himself, to question what was real, who to trust, and why this one moment at a small-town parade turned into a national mystery with consequences no one could have predicted. And just when the tension seems unbearable, when it feels like the truth is right around the corner, someone makes a move that changes everything. Frank hadn't slept much since the parade. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind rewound to that moment. The smirk on the teen's face, the chill in the air that didn't match the weather, the unsettling silence that fell over the crowd before the cameras started rolling. He'd been in tense situations before. He'd seen war zones, political unrest, things most people would never believe happened. But this felt different. Not like a battlefield. Like a trap. A slow, psychological kind of trap designed not to kill, but to disorient. To pull you in deeper until you didn't know who you could trust.
And right now, trust was in short supply.
He tried retracing his steps from that week. The grocery store. The post office. The old diner he hadn't been to in months. That's when he remembered the security camera mounted above the cashier's window at Murphy's Deli, just down the street from the parade route. He'd gone there the morning before everything happened. Grabbed coffee, spoke briefly with a man in a navy windbreaker who seemed oddly interested in which part of town Frank lived in. At the time, it felt like small talk. Now, it felt like surveillance. So Frank returned, hoping the footage might show something. Maybe that man, maybe a license plate, maybe proof he wasn't imagining things. But when he asked the owner, an old friend of his named Terry, the answer stopped him cold. The system's been wiped, Terry said with a shrug. Whole hard drive crashed. Tech guy says it's fried. But Frank had installed that system himself 5 years earlier. He knew it had backup protocols, redundancies built to avoid exactly that kind of total loss. Something didn't add up. And when he pressed Terry on it, his friend got tense, defensive, even angry, like he was scared to say more. That's when Frank noticed something else, a long scratch across the countertop near the register. Not natural wear and tear.
Fresh.
Deliberate. Like someone had dragged a tool or metal case across it.
He didn't ask.
Just nodded, thanked Terry, and left. But the knot in his stomach grew tighter. Someone had erased that footage. And they'd done it from the inside. Later that day, a white envelope appeared at his front door, again with no return address. This time it held something different. A photo, grainy, printed on matte paper, clearly zoomed in from a distance. It showed Frank sitting on a park bench alone from behind. But that wasn't what caught his eye. In the blurred background stood 2 figures, one of them clearly the teen from the parade, the other older, maybe in his 30s, wearing a ball cap pulled low over his eyes. Written on the back, in thick black marker, were 3 words: "Stop. You're warned." Frank didn't show the photo to the police. He knew how these things worked. Too much time had passed. No solid suspect. No clear threat. And he didn't trust the local department not to file it under senior paranoia and move on. So he reached out to the only person he thought might help, someone from his past who owed him a favor. A woman named Dana McGill. They'd served in the same sector overseas, years ago. She had moved into private security work after leaving the service, then disappeared into the world of high-end risk analysis and digital forensics. He hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. But when he called, she answered after 2 rings and said, without hesitation, "I was wondering how long it'd take." Dana met him the next day, unannounced, at the local cemetery. They didn't hug, didn't even shake hands, just walked side by side between the tombstones, eyes forward, words hushed. She told him she'd been monitoring online chatter ever since the parade video went viral. Not just public comments, but back-end metadata. Bot patterns. Ghost accounts. Someone, somewhere, was pushing this story, amplifying it, but not organically, with intention. Dana said the patterns matched known operations used by digital influence campaigns, groups that operate in the shadows to manipulate public perception, discredit people, or bury inconvenient truths. When Frank asked why anyone would target him, she paused. Then she said something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "This isn't about you, Frank. It's about something you were connected to years ago. Something you didn't even know was classified." He pushed for details, but she wouldn't give any. Said it wasn't safe to talk more in public. Promised to dig into her files and get back to him. But 3 days passed. He pushed for details, but she wouldn't give any. Said it wasn't safe to talk more in public. Promised to dig into her files and get back to him. But 3 days passed. Then 4. No calls. No texts. Finally, Frank drove out to the small cabin she kept about an hour outside town. But when he got there, the place was dark. Empty. A "for sale" sign had been hammered into the dirt out front. Inside, no furniture. No trace of Dana at all. Just one thing left behind. An old flash drive duct taped to the underside of a loose floorboard. No note. No label. Just a tiny triangle scratched into its plastic casing. When Frank plugged it into his laptop back home, he found dozens of encrypted files. He didn't understand most of them. Code, logs, strange internal memos marked with redacted dates, and strings of letters and numbers. But one folder caught his attention. It was titled simply, March 11th. He clicked, and a single video began to play. It was low-resolution surveillance footage, probably taken from a helmet cam.
Dust. Gunfire.
A foreign language in the background. Then suddenly Frank saw himself. Younger, faster, his voice commanding. Standing over a crate. Metal. Unmarked. While radioing something in. That mission wasn't supposed to be documented. It had never been on the record. In fact, as far as Frank remembered, they were told to forget it ever happened. And then the screen went black. No error. No glitch. Just total shutdown. Frank tried restarting the laptop, but it wouldn't boot. Power light flickered, then died. He stared at the blank screen, realizing someone had been one step ahead the entire time. That flash drive wasn't a clue, it was bait. A digital tripwire. And he'd just set it off. In the dead silence of his home, as he reached instinctively for the disconnected landline, his only untraceable connection left, he heard something outside. A slow crunch of gravel. A car engine idling. Then nothing. The screen may have gone black, but something had just been triggered. And this time, whoever was behind it wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. The silence outside felt heavier than any gunfire Frank had ever faced. It was that eerie, unnatural kind of quiet that blankets everything right before something happens, something you can't take back. He stood completely still, ears straining for the faintest sound of movement, trying to read the shadows outside his window without giving away his position. Whoever was out there didn't want to be seen. And they were patient. That scared him more than anything. But as he debated whether to grab the pistol locked in his bedroom drawer, the landline rang. It was the old rotary kind, loud, piercing, impossible to ignore. He froze, pulse pounding, as it rang again, then again. He answered on the 4th ring, not saying a word, just breathing. Frank. The voice was familiar. Female.
Shaky.
"It's Carla. You need to listen. I just found something, and I think you're in real danger." Carla Bennett had been Frank's neighbor for nearly a decade. They weren't close, not in the typical sense. But she was one of the few people he trusted. She'd lost her husband in Iraq, and they had bonded quietly over grief, over shared memories of a world most people in their neighborhood couldn't understand. She had 2 kids, a teaching job, and lived a life that didn't ask for much attention. Which is why her call chilled him to the bone. She didn't panic easily. She told him that earlier that day, she'd received an envelope nearly identical to the one Frank had gotten. A plain white exterior, no return address. Inside was a photo, but this one was different. It showed her 2 children, walking home from school. They looked unaware of the camera, like it had been taken from a distance, behind a tree, or from a vehicle. Written across the bottom of the photo, in the same thick black ink, were the words, "You're next." That wasn't all. Carla said she'd found something else, something weird, on her back porch the night before. A USB drive. She hadn't plugged it in. Too scared. But she knew enough to realize it wasn't something a kid dropped. And something about it felt wrong. The same scratched triangle mark that Frank had seen was etched into one corner. That symbol, whatever it meant, wasn't just random anymore. It was deliberate, calculated. And it wasn't just targeting veterans. It was targeting anyone connected to that day. Frank told Carla not to touch the drive, to leave the house with her kids, and stay somewhere public, somewhere monitored. But even as he said it, he knew that might not be enough. This thing, whatever it was, had resources, technology,
Reach.
and suddenly it had a new edge. Unpredictability. Because now it wasn't just about what happened at the parade. It was about people being hunted, silenced. And that flash drive? That wasn't bait just for him. It was part of a wider operation, maybe a cover-up or something more sinister. The next morning, the story took another twist, this time from an unexpected source. A reporter named Kelsey Grant, known for her investigative exposés on government mishandling and corporate secrecy, knocked on Frank's door. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Straight to the point, she told Frank she'd been tracking a strange pattern of digital suppression and algorithmic blackouts tied to content involving certain veterans. YouTube videos disappearing. Reddit threads vanishing. Facebook groups suddenly banned without cause. And all of them had one thing in common: mentions of a long-forgotten unit from Operation Horizon Crest. Frank froze. Horizon Crest was the name of a classified mission he'd been briefed on once, just once, 20 years ago. It was scrubbed from their records shortly after. He was never deployed under it. Never involved directly. But it was one of those things whispered in the mess halls, the kind of mission where people went in but didn't come back. The kind of mission the military buried so deep, not even satellites remembered where it happened. Kelsey handed him a printed email, anonymous, sent to her via a secure contact form on the dark web. It read, "If you want the truth about the parade veteran, follow the money trail from Horizon Crest." It was never about the kid. It's about the cover story. The email was signed with the same triangle symbol etched on the USB drives. This changed everything. If Horizon Crest was somehow connected to the smear campaign, then someone was rewriting history in real time, targeting those with even peripheral ties. Spinning narratives, deleting files, threatening lives. But for what purpose? To protect a mission? A name? A corporation? Frank didn't know. But what haunted him more was the idea that this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about control. The kind that shapes how people see the world. Who's a hero? Who's a villain? And who gets to write the last word? Just as Kelsey prepared to leave, her phone pinged. Her eyes widened. She showed Frank the screen. A text message from an unknown number. Turn around. They both did. And parked across the street was a nondescript black SUV, engine running, windows tinted pitch dark. Within seconds, it pulled away, slow, deliberate, as if letting them know it had already seen enough. And just like that, Frank realized, this wasn't some angry teenager looking for viral fame. This wasn't about disrespect. This was a coordinated effort, with layers he couldn't yet see, players he couldn't yet name. And somewhere in the middle of it all was a truth so volatile, someone was willing to erase entire lives to keep it buried. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the real twist was still to come. Because someone else had already broken into the flash drive. Someone watching from the sidelines. Someone who wasn't supposed to be involved. And they were about to leak a file that would blow the entire story wide open, or get them all killed. The day started like any other, with the usual grogginess creeping in from a restless night's sleep. But that quiet morning took on an unsettling weight the moment Frank stepped outside his front door. The world didn't look any different, but something in the air had shifted. Maybe it was the way the wind cut through the trees, or the distant hum of cars that seemed louder than usual. But Frank couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hairs on the back of his neck stood at attention, as if his body could sense the danger he hadn't yet fully understood. It started with the phone call. It wasn't Kelsey. It wasn't Carla. No, this call came from a number he didn't recognize. His hand shook as he answered, unsure if he was making a mistake. The voice on the other end was distorted, filtered through a deep, mechanical buzz that made the words almost impossible to catch. "We know where you are," the voice said, the words cold flat. "Stop digging. Leave the past buried. Or you won't be able to protect anyone you love." For a moment, Frank's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to hang up, but the warning lingered in the air like a poison, thickening with every second that passed. He'd been warned before, but this time it felt different. More urgent. The words had a finality to them, as if someone knew exactly what he was getting into, and how far he was willing to go. Frank slammed the phone down, his hands trembling. He couldn't breathe, not from fear, but from the weight of it. The knowledge that this wasn't just some hacker or a random person trying to scare him. This was personal. He glanced across the street, half expecting to see the black SUV again, the one from last night. But it was gone. Still, the unease gnawed at him. As the day wore on, his thoughts began to spiral. Was he being watched? Who had been tracking him? Carla's warning played on repeat in his head. "They're closer than you think." He had no doubt now. This wasn't a conspiracy theory or some twisted game. Someone had eyes on him. On all of them. That evening, Frank went out to his car to clear his head. The streets were empty. The suburban quiet that he had once found peaceful now felt suffocating. He was just about to start the engine when he saw something that made his heart stop. At the far end of the block, standing just beneath a street lamp, was a figure. A silhouette, barely discernible, but enough to make his blood run cold. The person wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. Frank's chest tightened. This wasn't just coincidence. He wasn't being paranoid. Someone was here, close, stalking him like prey. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, torn between staying in the safety of his car and confronting whatever or whoever was out there. Seconds stretched into minutes, and just as the figure began to step forward, Frank made his decision. He wasn't going to wait to be caught off guard. But when he threw the car into gear and sped down the street, the figure was already gone. Disappeared into the night, as if they'd never been there at all. His pulse raced, but it wasn't just fear he felt. It was frustration. Every step he took toward uncovering the truth only seemed to bury him deeper. Every lead, every piece of evidence, had more questions than answers. And now, he couldn't even trust his own senses. The shadow he'd seen could have been anyone, or no one at all. But deep down, Frank knew better. They were closing in on him. He could feel it in his bones. When he returned home that night, he was surprised to see the front door slightly ajar. His stomach twisted. He hadn't left it like that. He stepped inside cautiously, his hand instinctively brushing against the cold metal of the gun hidden in the drawer. The house was unnervingly still. No signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. But that didn't sit right with him. The silence echoed too loudly. Something had changed while he was gone. The real shock came when he made his way to the kitchen. There, sitting on the counter, was a manila envelope. The same kind that had appeared on his doorstep days ago. He froze, staring at it, heart thumping in his chest. He hadn't touched that door, hadn't opened it in hours. So how? He stepped forward slowly, lifting the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, there was nothing but a single sheet of paper. On it, typed in large, bold letters, "You're not safe anymore. They know everything." Frank's thoughts raced. They knew. They knew his every move, his every conversation. The only people who could have gotten into his house were the ones who had been watching him this whole time. Whoever they weren't afraid of him. They weren't afraid of anything. Just as Frank was about to read the note again, a loud crash came from upstairs. It wasn't just a bump, a sound that could be explained away. No, it was a crash, a heavy, deliberate noise that could only mean one thing. Someone had broken in. He spun around, adrenaline surging through his veins as he rushed toward the stairs. But before he could make it, his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a message. And it was from an unknown number. The words on the screen were simple, but they made his blood freeze. Carla's gone. Frank's mind reeled. Carla? No, this couldn't be happening. Not her.
She was part of this.
She was his last thread of stability in all of this chaos. And now she was gone. Was this all connected? Was someone targeting everyone who had tried to get to the truth? He couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on him as he realized the magnitude of the situation. His fear was no longer just about him. It was about everyone he cared about. His friends, his family. They were all at risk. As Frank dashed toward the stairs, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever had started with a photo at a parade had grown into something far more dangerous. And someone who had been pulling the strings all along was always one step ahead of him. With every passing moment, Frank realized that the question he'd been asking all along, who was behind this, was becoming less important than the one he was asking now. How long until they came for him? 2. As Frank stood frozen in his living room, staring at the chilling message about Carla's disappearance, something in his gut twisted. He had always believed that this web of deception, threats, and warnings was connected to something bigger, a conspiracy that had been years in the making, slowly tightening its grip around him. But as he glanced back toward the front door, the thought crossed his mind like a jolt of electricity. What if everything he thought he knew was wrong? What if he was being led down a path that was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated trap, designed to mislead him at every turn? He felt his pulse quicken as the pieces of the puzzle, which had seemed so clear, began to fall apart. The phone call, the mysterious envelopes, the warning signs, it all started to feel too convenient, too planned. And the fact that Carla, the one person he trusted more than anyone, had vanished so suddenly, it wasn't just suspicious, it was strategically timed. He had been so focused on the external threat, the unknown figure who had been pulling the strings from the shadows, that he never once questioned the people closest to him. In a fit of desperation, Frank decided to reach out to Kelsey. She had been a constant support throughout the entire ordeal. Kelsey, with her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude, had been his sounding board, offering advice and calming his nerves whenever the pressure became too overwhelming. But tonight, something was different. Frank's hands shook as he dialed her number, each ring feeling like an eternity. He needed answers, and Kelsey had always been there to provide them, until now. When she picked up, her voice sounded distant, colder than he'd ever heard it before. "Frank," she said, her words clipped. "I don't think you should be doing this. You're getting too deep. It's not worth it. Please stop." He felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. The Kelsey he knew, the one who had been by his side, urging him to dig deeper into the truth, now sounded like she was telling him to quit, to walk away. Frank tried to push past the confusion. "What do you mean, Kelsey? You were the one who said this could change everything. You wanted to find the truth, just as much as I did." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Frank's heart raced in the silence. Then, finally, Kelsey's voice cracked. "I wasn't trying to help you, Frank. I've been trying to stop you." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, slowly suffocating him. Frank's breath hitched. "What are you talking about? Why would you?" "I'm sorry," she interrupted. "I didn't want you to find out. But you were getting too close. It was never meant to go this far. The story you're chasing? It's not what you think." Frank's stomach churned, his mind reeling with confusion. The betrayal didn't make sense. Kelsey was a part of the whole thing?
But why?
He had trusted her more than anyone. And now, She was telling him that the entire investigation was a lie. The very thing he devoted himself to uncovering was now unraveling in front of his eyes, leaving him with more questions than ever. Before he could even process what Kelsey had just said, she dropped a bombshell that left him frozen in his tracks. "You weren't the first one to receive those messages, Frank. And you won't be the last." His heart skipped a beat.
What?
"What do you mean?" "You weren't the first person to be targeted in this mess. Carla, she was part of it too. She knew all along." Frank felt the weight of her words crash over him like a tidal wave. Carla, the woman who had been his ally, his confidant, the one he thought he could rely on, had known all along? Kelsey wasn't the only one who had been hiding things. Everyone around him had been playing a part in this twisted game, and Frank was just a pawn, a means to an end. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations, odd behaviors, and vague explanations. The warning signs had been there all along, but Frank had been too caught up in the need for answers to see them. Carla's sudden disappearance, the strange timing of the threats, Kelsey's sudden change of heart, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. This entire investigation had been orchestrated from the beginning, and Frank had been walking right into the hands of whoever was behind it. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces started to come together, and they painted a far darker picture than he could have ever imagined. The people he trusted were never trying to help him. They were using him. This wasn't about uncovering the truth. It was about keeping a secret buried, no matter the cost. But there was one detail that didn't sit right with Frank. Why had Kelsey just revealed all of this to him? Why had she chosen now to expose everything? His mind whirled as Kelsey's voice cut through the confusion. "Frank, you need to listen to me. I don't have much time. They're coming for you, and I can't protect you anymore." Her voice was almost pleading now, as if she was trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. Before Frank could respond, the line went dead. He sat in the silence, stunned, every muscle in his body locked in place. The room felt too small, the walls closing in as he realized that the game had changed entirely. Everything he thought he understood about this mystery had just been turned upside down. Kelsey, Carla, the mysterious threats, the warnings, they were all connected, but not in the way he had imagined. A thought gnawed at the back of his mind, something he couldn't ignore. If everyone around him had been playing their own part in this tangled web, what role did Frank play? And more importantly, who was really pulling the strings? Was it possible that the very people he had been trying to protect had been the ones orchestrating his downfall all along? The deeper Frank dug, the more questions he had, and the more dangerous the answers became. What had started as a search for the truth was now a race to survive. And Frank wasn't sure who to trust anymore, or even if he could trust himself. The only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't back out now. Not when he was so close to uncovering everything. But with the pieces of the puzzle scattered and no idea who to turn to, Frank felt more lost than ever. And somewhere out there, someone was waiting for him to make his next move. The weight of Kelsey's cryptic warning echoed in Frank's mind, bouncing off the walls of his apartment like a persistent drumbeat. His breath was shallow as he sat, staring blankly at the phone that had gone silent after Kelsey's abrupt departure. She had made it clear. "They're coming for you, Frank." But who were they, and how far would they go to protect whatever secret he had stumbled upon? The stakes were rising, and Frank could feel the walls closing in on him from all sides, leaving him with a terrifying realization that he was now in a game that was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The room around him felt suffocating, as if the air had thickened with dread. He couldn't just sit there, frozen in fear. But the problem was, every decision felt like a losing one. Frank's instinct screamed at him to confront Kelsey, to demand answers, but something about her tone, so full of regret and fear, made him pause. What if she wasn't lying? What if she had been just as manipulated as he had been, trapped in a web of deceit that she could no longer escape from? The more Frank thought about it, the more confused he became. How could he trust anyone anymore? It seemed as if everyone around him was hiding something, and even those who had been closest to him now felt like strangers. His mind raced to Carla. She had vanished, gone without a trace. The one person he had leaned on through this entire ordeal had disappeared just when he needed her the most.
But why?
What had she known? And what role did Frank play in this ever-deepening mystery? The next few hours were a blur of thoughts and sleepless tossing in bed. Frank's mind kept returning to the strange, veiled threat that hung over him. He could still hear Kelsey's last words. "You can't stop now. They'll stop you before you uncover everything." That was the final piece that cracked the veneer of control he thought he had. They were moving faster now, closing in, and Frank was the one left scrambling to make sense of it all. He needed to confront someone, anyone, to pull the curtain back on this mess and finally get to the truth. But just as he was about to make a call, the doorbell rang. A chill ran down Frank's spine, his heart racing in his chest. He wasn't expecting anyone. He had told himself he'd stay out of sight, hide in his apartment until he had a clearer understanding of what was going on. But the bell kept ringing, insistently, as if the visitor knew he was inside. His instincts screamed at him to avoid confrontation, to lock the door and pretend he wasn't there. But curiosity, a sick, nagging curiosity, pulled him to the door. Slowly, he crept toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. The moment he opened the door, he was met with the last person he ever expected to see. It was Kelsey. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and filled with a kind of terror that sent a shiver through Frank's bones. She was shaking, looking over her shoulder as if expecting someone to be following her. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped inside when Frank hesitated, closing the door behind her in one swift movement. "I shouldn't have come," Kelsey whispered, her voice barely audible. "But you have to listen to me, Frank. They're not going to stop, not until they get what they want." Frank stood there, frozen, a dozen questions bursting in his head. But before he could ask, she held up her hand. "You don't understand. They've been watching you. Watching us both. They know everything, Frank." His throat tightened. "What do you mean? Who knows everything?" Kelsey took a deep breath, her eyes darkening with the weight of what she was about to say. "It's not just the people you think, Frank. It's everyone. Carla, me, you, we've all been part of this. I didn't want you to know. I never wanted you to get hurt." The words hit Frank like a sucker punch. Everything he thought he understood about this entire situation, about Kelsey, about Carla, about the whole damn mystery, was crumbling before him. Kelsey was involved. She was part of it. The woman who had been the one voice of reason throughout this ordeal was now confessing to being part of whatever twisted game had been unfolding around him. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to scream at her, demand to know why, how, everything. But instead, a suffocating silence filled the room as Kelsey seemed to shrink into herself. "They've given me a choice, Frank. A choice I never wanted to make," Kelsey said, barely able to look him in the eye. "If I stop helping you, they'll leave me alone. But if I keep pushing, if I help you find the truth,
I don't know what will happen.
You might not survive it." Frank's mind was spinning, his heart hammering in his chest. The situation had just become worse, not better. He was stuck between two impossible choices: believe Kelsey, who was clearly terrified and unraveling before his eyes, or continue down this dangerous path, where the truth seemed to come with a price he wasn't sure he was willing to pay. What had Kelsey done? How deep was she into this? And was Frank willing to risk everything, his safety, his sanity, his very life, to uncover a truth that might destroy everything? "I don't know who to trust anymore," Frank muttered, the words slipping out in a hoarse whisper. "How am I supposed to know if you're telling the truth?" Kelsey stepped closer, her face softening with guilt and fear. "I never wanted to hurt you, Frank. But now I'm afraid that if you keep digging, if you keep going, you'll become the next target. They'll come for you, and they won't stop until you're gone. I won't be able to stop them." Her words hit him like a tidal wave. The woman who had been his rock, his ally, had now become someone he wasn't sure he could trust. The truth was slipping further from his grasp, and with every passing moment, the cost of uncovering it seemed more and more unbearable. Frank took a step back, his mind racing. He could feel the walls closing in, his entire world crumbling under the weight of secrets he wasn't ready to face. "I don't know what to do," he muttered. "I don't know who to believe. Kelsey reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on his arm. Whatever happens, Frank, please know, I never meant for any of this. But I can't protect you anymore. You're on your own now. With that, she turned, walking out the door and leaving Frank standing in the silence. The decision lay in his hands now, and he could feel the tension rising. He was standing on the edge of a precipice, with no way to know whether taking the next step would lead him to the truth or to his doom. The world outside felt darker, colder, and Frank knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The cold air in Frank's apartment felt suffocating after Kelsey left. His thoughts churned like a whirlpool, each one pulling him deeper into the mystery that had become his life. He couldn't trust anyone, not even Kelsey. How had everything spiraled this far? He thought he had been close to understanding, to cracking the puzzle, but now, more than ever, everything seemed shrouded in lies and half-truths. The fear that had begun as a quiet whisper in his mind had now grown into a full-blown scream, drowning out any semblance of reason. What was he really dealing with? Who could he trust? And more importantly, who had been pulling the strings all along? The unanswered questions gnawed at him, and he knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening, it was much bigger than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just about him or Kelsey. It was about something far more dangerous. Something that stretched far beyond the boundaries of what he could see. And Frank had just scratched the surface. The conspiracy wasn't just a few bad actors hiding in the shadows. It was a massive web of deception, with fingers reaching into places he had no idea existed. He had been nothing more than a pawn in a game that had been planned long before he even realized what was at stake. But it wasn't until the phone rang that the final pieces began to fall into place. Frank's heart skipped as he saw the name on the screen. It was Carla's number. The same Carla who had vanished without a trace. The same woman who had been so crucial to everything he thought he understood. His hand shook as he answered, his voice hoarse with anticipation. "Carla?" he asked, barely able to believe what he was seeing. There was a long pause before the voice on the other end spoke, and Frank's blood ran cold. "Frank, listen carefully. Everything you think you know is wrong. I'm not safe. They know I've been talking to you. You need to stop looking into this before it's too late." Frank's pulse raced. He couldn't process what he was hearing. "Carla, what do you mean? You've been gone for days.
Who knows you've been talking to me?"
Carla's voice dropped to a whisper, and Frank could almost hear her trembling. "There's a bigger picture here than just you and me. They're everywhere, Frank. The people you've been trusting, Kelsey, even none of us are who we say we are. We've all been part of this system, this organization. And they're going to come for you next." Frank's mind was reeling, but before he could ask more, Carla cut him off. "You need to understand, Frank. It's bigger than just one person. It's a network, a hidden society with their hands in everything. I didn't want to believe it, but they've been controlling us all along." Her voice cracked. "They made me do things I never thought I'd do. I've been trying to get out, but it's too late for me. I don't know how much longer I have." Before Frank could respond, the line went dead. His thoughts spun, panic creeping in as he realized the scale of what he was dealing with. The weight of the conspiracy hit him like a freight train. Kelsey, Carla, even the people in the shadows, none of them were what they appeared to be. It wasn't just about him uncovering the truth anymore. It was about survival. It was about staying alive long enough to understand who was behind all of this and why. But the reality of it all was even more terrifying than he imagined. Frank had become a pawn in a much larger game. A game with rules he couldn't comprehend, played by people who had every advantage. His mind flashed back to Kelsey's warnings. They won't stop until they get what they want. The weight of her words crushed him as he realized that whatever it was they were after, it was much bigger than just him. And the closer he got to finding answers, the more danger he was in. There was no turning back now. Frank had crossed a line, and now, the consequences were catching up to him. The people behind this, the ones orchestrating the whole thing, were watching his every move. They knew his every thought before he even had a chance to act. It was only a matter of time before they made their next move. Frank's phone buzzed in his hand, and when he looked at the screen, his heart sank. It was a text from an unknown number. "We've been waiting for you, Frank. You can't run anymore. You're already in too deep. There's no way out. You'll regret digging into this. A cold sweat ran down Frank's back. It was happening. The walls were closing in, and the weight of the conspiracy was heavier than ever. He was no longer just trying to uncover the truth. Now he was fighting for his life, and the odds were stacked against him. As he paced back and forth in the apartment, a realization began to settle in. There was no escaping this. He was trapped in a world that had been set in motion long before he even knew it existed. And there was no way to undo what had been done. The conspiracy wasn't something he could walk away from. It was everywhere, woven into the fabric of his life in ways he couldn't see. Everyone he had ever trusted had been part of it, and the people pulling the strings were far more powerful than he could have imagined. Frank's mind was spiraling, and for the first time, he began to question whether uncovering the truth was worth the cost. But there was no turning back now. It was too late to back out. The stakes had grown too high. As Frank looked out of his window, watching the street below, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already closing in, watching him. He didn't know who to trust anymore, and every decision felt like a risk. But one thing was certain. There was no way out. The game was on, and Frank had just been pulled deeper into it. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message. It was a call, an unknown number. His breath hitched as he answered. "Frank," a voice said, chillingly calm. "You don't know how deep this goes, but you're going to find out soon enough." And with that, the call ended. Frank's heart hammered in his chest as he made his way to the old warehouse at the edge of town. It had taken him days to find the place. Days of following leads, of piecing together fragments of conversations and messages, of running from shadows that always seemed to be one step ahead. But now, here he was, standing on the threshold of what could very well be his last moment of clarity. The truth he had been chasing for so long was just within reach, if he was willing to risk everything to uncover it. His breath came in shallow gasps, his hands trembling as they gripped the cold metal of the warehouse door. Every instinct told him to turn back, to walk away from the danger, the darkness, the endless spiral of paranoia that had consumed his life for the past few weeks. But deep down, he knew he couldn't. He had no choice. This was the final chapter in a story that had already cost him so much, and he wasn't going to let it end with more unanswered questions. He pushed the door open, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. The warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with dust, and the smell of something stale. Frank's eyes darted around, scanning every shadow, every corner, looking for the person who had been pulling the strings all along. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but he was damn sure he was going to find out tonight. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the space, its smooth, almost mocking tone sending a shiver down Frank's spine. "You're late, Frank," the voice said, and Frank's blood ran cold. It was familiar, but it took him a moment to place it. "Kelsey," he breathed, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. Of course. She had been the key all along. The one person he thought he could trust, the one who had been by his side through all of it. But now, standing here in the heart of the warehouse, surrounded by shadows, Frank understood. It had all been a lie. Kelsey stepped out from the darkness, her face half hidden in the dim light. She wore a calm, almost detached expression, but Frank could see the faintest hint of something else in her eyes, something cold, something he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't the woman he thought he knew. She was someone else entirely. "You were always too curious for your own good, Frank," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "That's why I had to keep you in the dark. I couldn't risk you finding out the truth. But you wouldn't stop digging, would you?" Frank's pulse raced, and he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Why, Kelsey? Why all of this? What's the end game here? Who are you really working for?" Her lips curled into a slight smile, but it was as cold and calculated as the rest of her demeanor. "Working for?" she echoed, as though the concept of working for someone was beneath her. "No, Frank. You don't get it. I'm the one who's been in control this whole time. I've been watching, orchestrating, guiding everything because it all leads to this. You, me, this moment. You were always meant to play this part." Frank's mind reeled. No, this can't be real. You've been lying to me this whole time? Everything we've shared, every moment we've had, was a lie? Kelsey shrugged, almost nonchalantly. Truth is subjective, Frank. I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually. The words hit Frank like a slap to the face. All this time, all the clues, all the things he'd been taught to believe, everything had been a carefully constructed illusion.
But why?
What was the ultimate goal here? He needed answers. Needed to understand why she was doing this to him, to everyone. I'm not afraid of you, Kelsey, Frank said, his voice low but steady. I will get to the bottom of this. And when I do, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. She smiled, a thin, predatory smile, as she took a step closer to him. You still don't get it, do you, Frank? You never will. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a split second, Frank saw something flicker in them. A flicker of doubt, maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it came. You've been a part of this from the start, whether you want to admit it or not. And then, just as Frank was about to say something, to challenge her, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind him. He turned just in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows. The sight of this person made his stomach drop. It was Carla, alive but different. Her eyes were hollow, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days, her clothes disheveled as though she had been dragged through hell. Kelsey, what is this? Carla demanded, her voice cracked, as she took a step forward. What are you doing? Kelsey raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed by Carla's presence. You really think you're the hero here, don't you? You were never meant to save Frank. He was always meant to uncover this. To understand everything. Frank could barely process the words, too overwhelmed by the twisted game unfolding before him. The betrayal stung like 1,000 cuts, but there was something more sinister at play. Kelsey, Carla, they were both in on it. But who else? How deep did this go? And then, the final twist came. As Frank struggled to comprehend what was happening, the sound of a door slamming open broke the tension. A new voice, calm, cold, cut through the air. You think this is about you, Frank? The voice belonged to someone he hadn't seen in weeks, someone he thought he could trust more than anyone else. The figure stepped into the light, and Frank's heart sank as he recognized the man before him. It was his father.
Dad.
Frank's voice cracked, his world shattering in that instant. You're behind this too? His father looked at him with a sad, almost pitying expression. You were always too curious, Frank. But you'll learn. You'll understand. And maybe, in the end, you'll see that we've all been part of something much bigger than any of us. You just didn't know it yet. The weight of the moment crushed Frank's chest. His father, the one person he thought he could count on, was the mastermind behind the whole thing. His heart raced as the walls closed in, and all the pieces he thought he understood now fell into a dark, chaotic mess. Everything he had worked for, everything he thought he had figured out, had been a lie. The truth was far darker than he could have imagined, and it was only just beginning to unfold. And then, as if on cue, the lights flickered, and the entire warehouse plunged into darkness. The last thing Frank heard was the sound of his father's voice, as it echoed through the black void. You can't escape this, Frank. We've been watching you this whole time. The lights flickered back on, casting harsh, cold light over the now silent warehouse. Frank's body was numb, his mind still reeling from the chaos of the last few minutes. His father, the man he had trusted most in the world, had been behind everything all along. But even as the harsh truth settled in, Frank realized that the pieces of this twisted puzzle weren't as neatly tied together as they seemed. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about something bigger. Something more profound than the surface drama that had pulled him into this mess. His father stood before him, looking eerily calm in the center of the dimly lit space. Kelsey and Carla were standing off to the side, their faces unreadable, like two pieces in a game that had long since stopped being about the players. Frank's heart was pounding in his chest, but there was a part of him that knew, deep down, this wasn't the end.
It couldn't be.
Everything he had uncovered, every twisted revelation, was only part of a story that had been unfolding for years, a story that he hadn't yet fully understood. He felt something shift inside him, a resolve forming in his gut. His father stepped forward, his expression softening just slightly. You've always been smart, Frank. Too smart for your own good. But this was never meant for you to uncover. You had to know, though. You had to understand that there's more at play here than just our little family, than just the people you think you can trust. Frank's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? What the hell is going on, Dad? For a moment, his father hesitated, as if weighing the gravity of what he was about to say. Finally, he spoke in a tone that was almost apologetic. You think this is all about power or control, but it's not, Frank. We've been part of something much bigger than you could ever imagine. The world, the systems, the forces that shape everything. This isn't just a game. It's a necessity. A revolution. You don't understand the things I've had to do, but you will. One day. Frank shook his head, trying to process the words, trying to fit them into a reality he no longer recognized. You're talking like some kind of conspiracy. A bigger plan. But I've seen enough to know it's more than that. You've manipulated everything. Everyone. All this pain. It's for nothing, Dad. His father's gaze hardened, his voice turning cold. It's never for nothing. It's all part of the design. People like you, people who dig too deep, they think they're seeing the full picture. But there's always more. Always a layer beneath that you'll never reach. That's the nature of this world. You've never been in control, Frank. You've always been a pawn. The finality of his father's words hit Frank like a wave. It was as if everything he'd believed in, everything he thought he understood about his own life, had been ripped away and replaced with this chilling truth. But even as his father's words settled in, Frank felt something in him stir, a fire, a sense of clarity. He wasn't done yet. He couldn't be. Before he could say anything else, Kelsey spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. You don't have to be a part of this, Frank. You can walk away. You can have your life back. All of it. No one has to know what you've discovered. You can forget all of this, and we'll protect you. Frank's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, he saw something in her gaze that was more human than he had expected, a flicker of guilt, a trace of hesitation. But it was quickly gone, replaced by the same calculated calm that had defined her actions from the very beginning. I don't want your protection, he said, his voice low but steady. I don't want any of it. This has gone too far. You've hurt too many people. Kelsey didn't respond immediately. She simply turned away, a small, almost imperceptible shrug signaling her defeat. The world Frank had stepped into was a machine, a cold, uncaring mechanism that operated without mercy, without forgiveness. And then, just when Frank thought he might finally have a grip on the truth, a sudden shift rattled him to his core. Carla, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward with a look of fierce determination in her eyes. You think it's over, Frank? She said, her voice fierce. You think that just because you know the truth, it means you can walk away unscathed? Frank's eyes widened, a chill creeping up his spine. What are you talking about? Carla's gaze hardened. The truth doesn't set you free, Frank. It traps you. You're already too far gone. And you'll never be allowed to leave this behind. The weight of her words hit him with the force of a freight train, and suddenly, Frank felt the crushing realization settle in his chest. No matter what he did, he would never be free. There would always be someone watching. Always a piece of the puzzle slipping just out of reach. As Frank stood there, frozen in place, his father's voice once again rang through the dimly lit warehouse. There's a bigger game here, son. You're not the first to think they could outrun this. But no one gets away. It's always been this way. And you're just the latest to learn the hard way. A sudden, unexpected silence filled the room. Frank's mind raced, his thoughts spinning out of control. The weight of everything, of his father's words, of Kelsey's cold indifference, of Carla's harsh warnings, pressed down on him. Was there truly no escape? Had everything he knew been a carefully designed illusion? But just as Frank opened his mouth to ask one final question, the warehouse doors slammed open with a deafening crash. A figure stepped into the light, a new player, one who had been hidden in the shadows until now. And with that figure came a revelation that shook Frank to his very core. The truth, it seemed, was far from over. And this story, for all its twists and turns, had only just begun. As the new figure stepped forward, Frank's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The world he thought he knew had been shattered, and the pieces were still falling, scattering around him, leaving more questions than answers. And as the figure approached, Frank could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. The truth, the betrayal, the danger. And it all came crashing down at once, leaving him with a single, terrifying thought. There was no going back now. The darkness had only just begun to envelop him.